Mike,
Yes.
have you done a podcast before?
Well, that's a interesting question. Two of my buddies did a little podcast interview with me a long time ago, but I think it had like 20 views. So I guess you could say yes, but nothing of this kind of magnitude.
Well, number one, thank you for thinking that we have a large voice. But, dude, this is the kind of podcast I love.
Okay.
And this is a conversation between two scientists. You have a biological background, right? As I understand it.
I do. Yes.
And it's based on what you emailed me, I think it's going to be pretty amazing because if you allow me, I want to read people the email that you sent me, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Mike reached out, you reached out via info@bloodorigins.com. You went to our website. You have been listening to our podcast following Blood Origins. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, probably over a year and a half, give or take. Yeah.
How did you find us? I'm curious.
It was interesting. When I started getting into the idea of looking at hunting and my role in it, although I've been researching it for years, but when I started considering, okay, I actually want to do this, I started looking at different podcasts, and I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so I'm out in my truck a lot. Often making sometimes 2-hour drives to get to sites where I do surveys and things like that. And so I have a lot of free time on my hands when I'm in my government vehicle. So I happened upon it and I just started to listen.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm always intrigued at how people find us and what sparks them or whatnot. And obviously we have created enough content to keep you interested, keep you thinking about hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And you decided to reach out. And here's what you said. And I want to break this down. Maybe what I'll do is I won't say the entire thing first. I'll just go bit by bit because it's interesting. I think the whole email has a whole story to it.
Sure.
So the first thing you say is, okay, so you've convinced me to hunt my first deer.
Correct.
How did we do that?
Okay, so it's a little bit of an interesting background. So I've done research on hunting for a long time.
Why? Why were you researching hunting?
I wanted to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly. I grew up.
Were you a hunter already? You weren't, right?
No. I grew up. I always wanted to work with wildlife, and I grew up, and I was raised in a very cookie cutter suburban neighborhood, family. Other than an uncle who's my father's sister's husband who hunts, there's no hunters in my family, or anything like that. And so I kind of grew up, I just loved wildlife, wanted to save wildlife, wanted to preserve wildlife. I started doing some work. I got my first degree in journalism and I started freelancing and I started traveling, going to Africa, doing things like that. And that's when I kind of got pulled into the hunting debate. And I experienced for years what I would consider cognitive dissonance. Because to me...
What does that mean?
Well, my feelings about it were always negative despite the facts that were put in front of me. Despite all the population studies, the understanding that, this is scientifically done, wildlife needs management. There was a part of me that even defended it, but then there was always a part of me that didn't like it. And it always had to do with the fact that at the end of the day, you're shooting an animal, whether you're using a bow or a rifle. You're shooting an animal. So that's how I...
Let me ask this quick. Can I stop the story for a second?
Sure.
In this moment when you're thinking about this and you're in the journalism space, because I'm super intrigued at people's thought processes in these spaces.
Sure.
Were you a meat eater during this time?
Of course.
Oh.
Yep. Of course.
And there was no crossover? There was no like thinking about killing, shooting an animal and the steak that I'm eating that night having died?
There was always that. That always ran through my brain. And that was the part that was so difficult for me. That's been difficult for me. Is I know where meat comes from, but yet it's out of sight, out of mind. You don't think about it. You know, whether you're ordering a burger from a drive-through window or whether you're, you know, you're eating Thanksgiving dinner, the turkey, you just don't think about it. And so I guess, you know, my brain came to understand how hunting works for wildlife conservation. My heart.
But in that space, both before, oh, okay, your brain said yes, but your heart was like, oh, hell no.
Yeah, exactly. So
would you have classified yourself as an anti-hunter?
Initially, up until several years ago, but it was your podcast that really moved me from. I was an anti-hunter originally, and then I started to understand hunting more. Then I started to, and I would even defend it, but I still couldn't do it, and I still had negative views of hunters and hunting. And it's so easy to lump hunters into this kind of monolithic group. And that's, so after a while it was like, but then I would listen to your podcast, and the more I listened, the more I started to make the shift from not just somebody who understands hunting more, but somebody who actively supports it for wildlife. I mean, I live in New York State. We have an overpopulation of white-tailed deer. It's insane. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see dead deer on the roadside. We need to be able to manage them for deer, for car strikes, to mitigate that, for forest ecology, different things like that. I mean, it makes the.
I'm surprised the antis haven't come out in these states that have monster roadkill numbers and said we need to stop driving to save the deer.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because you never know. That could become an argument. But yeah, I don't know. I got to a point where I just said to myself, okay, I listened, I learned, especially from, having been to Africa many times in my life and going back and forth, especially.
Where did you go in Africa?
Oh my gosh, I've been to South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, or not Namibia, I'm sorry, South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Uganda is where I've done some work. Tanzania, I was just in Tanzania in September on a safari, and that actually was I was in the Serengeti, and I didn't like it, honestly, because
why didn't you like it?
The mass tourism was ridiculous. I mean, I'm a guy who loves nature. I love being out in nature, and that only sealed the deal even more. I would have loved the Serengeti if if it had been me and maybe 5 other vehicles there, but it was crazy. And I mean, I understand, like, the Serengeti needs that. They need that kind of that money to support that park. But if you're out there for the experience of what nature really is, that's not it, at least for me. I mean, I don't want to make fun of other people for that. If that's your thing, that's awesome. But that's just not my thing. I don't like seeing a lion when there's like 20 other vehicles surrounding it. So.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. The commercialization of wildlife, specifically through photographic tourism, is heralded as the model for wildlife conservation. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it doesn't do great work in great places, which it does.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is photographic tourism is a volume-based system. And for them to make money, to be profitable, to make more money means more people, quicker turnarounds, 2 to 3 days on the ground, and the next, slew of tourists come back in.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing this 20, 25, 30. If there's no management or protocols in place, and most often the private game reserves have them, where it's like only 2 vehicles allowed in at one time. Once those 2 vehicles leave, the next 2 vehicles come in, kind of scenario.
Exactly.
But this chasing across the plains of 50 to 60 vehicles to try and get close to a line kill, the videos I've seen are absolutely shocking.
It was, and I was pretty disgusted by it. I mean, we were there at the Mara River crossing, and it was just, you saw these vehicles jockeying.
How many vehicles?
Oh my gosh. If I had to ballpark it, 150 plus vehicles.
Jeez.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, it was awful. It was really awful. It just reinforced, as a guy who loves to be out in nature, who loves to experience it, I mean, that's not experiencing nature. And like I said, I understand a park like that is in a little bit of a catch-22. They have to do what they have to do. But I don't know. It just reinforced to me more that there's these other places, usually adjacent to the national parks, and that you're not going to see that type of volume of wildlife, but that are just as crucial. And you're going to need to protect those areas too. They call them buffer zones, or migratory routes, or different things like that. And photographic tourists aren't going to go there just because you're not going to see that kind of wildlife. I also think there's something, I mean, as a little side note, I was hiking near some woods near my house a year ago, and a coyote and I actually kind of ran into each other by accident. And it was just such a cool experience. I wasn't hunting. I was just out there. But in that moment, I got a little nervous because I didn't know what it was. At first, I thought it was a dog, and then it growled, and it was like there was this, I don't even know how to describe it. It just, something totally different than when you're in the safety of a vehicle watching something completely different when you're on the ground. And I realized, I'm like, this is probably what hunters feel like a lot of times when they're out pursuing their quarry. You get that rush of adrenaline, you get that surge of, something very primal. And it's understanding our roots as a species, understanding who we are, where we come from. Like I said, it goes in tandem with what you've been talking about on your podcast. And it just, I slowly started to shift from, okay, I understand hunting, but I still don't like it. I understand it, but I really, I could very easily stereotype hunters, and I still was, to now all of a sudden I'm seeing it in a completely different light. Now it's something I, like to experience myself as an adult onset hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it's funny. You talk about, it makes sense. It's funny you talk about the photographic tourism. One of the things that'll come out in 2025 is a big elephant documentary out of Botswana. And in Botswana, the situation was in 2014, hunting elephants specifically got banned across the country.
Yes.
And the rhetoric that was put forward was like, don't worry, all of these hunting places, photographics are going to come in and they're going to replace everyone's jobs. Mm-hmm. Some places it did. For the vast majority of places, it didn't.
Right.
And so we went in and we said, okay, this one specific place is called NG13. A big elephant was killed in April of 2022. Mm-hmm. Big rigmarole came out of it. And a lot of fingers were pointed at the place saying NG13 should be turned into a photographic place. It should always be a photographic tourism place. So we purposely went in there to sort of disprove that rhetoric.
Okay.
So number one, it took you 2 days to drive there. On some of the worst dirt roads I've ever driven on in Africa. Then once you were there, so in the road into the property, we saw 3 animals in 3 hours.
Okay.
And I was like, dang, that's sparse. Like the density is super sparse. And when you look at the statistics or the data tied to photographics and ecotourism for it to be financially viable, guests have to have animal encounters every 6 or so minutes.
Yes.
So then we decided, let's do a game drive in this area at NG13. Number one, the roads are so bad that you can't game drive. It shakes the vehicle constantly. Like the deep sand ruts are impossible to remove, and it just would not be a pleasant ride.
Right.
The first animal we saw was a lone wildebeest at 17 minutes into the drive. Now, you can see a wildebeest anyway. You don't have to come to NG13 to see a wildebeest. The second animal we saw was a giraffe at the 46-minute mark. So we saw 2 animals literally in an hour of driving.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong. The area was beautiful, aesthetically, absolutely incredible. But it was not conducive for photographics. It was not conducive for 60 people to come in day one, see everything that they could see in 2.5 days and leave, and another 60 people come in.
Right.
Just was not going to be viable. And actually, nobody even looked at the place from a photographic perspective when the tenders were up from 2014 all the way through when banning of hunting got lifted in 2019. So it just speaks to the whole ideology. And again, photographics are great. They work actually quite harmoniously with hunting.
Right.
There's areas that Serengeti should be photographic only. But to change the experience that you had, you have to quadruple the cost.
Right.
I.e., Mike, it would have cost you 5 times as much to go on the game drive into Serengeti, but there'll be 5 times less vehicles.
Exactly.
So that's cool. So let's before I move further down the email.
Sure.
So you've been wrestling with this quandary.
Mm-hmm.
You've been wrestling in your brain.
Yep.
Have you decided to cross that chasm? Have you decided, like, yes, I am now going to be a hunter, and pulled the trigger?
I would like to. I mean, and
okay, you haven't done that yet.
No, full disclosure. I mean, I went out. I've been out with some folks. I've seen it, but there's a huge difference between watching it happen and doing it yourself. So, and I'm not gonna lie. When I saw it the first time, I was very saddened. I had a mix of emotions, but again, I didn't do it. I figured it would be the better thing to do to go out first and watch it done. The more responsible thing to do, rather than try to do something myself that and not even knowing if I could do it. It was hard, but at the same time, like I said, there's a huge difference between watching it and doing it yourself. Because when and I understand there are hunters and there are men and women that hunt and watch videos, and I've seen people do it, and I applaud them for their ability to do what they do. I, as someone who loves wildlife, absolutely loves wildlife, does not want to see wildlife go extinct, does not want to see their populations drop. I think hunting's fantastic, but like I said, there's a huge part of me that wrestles with the idea of taking a life, because when you pull that bow back, or when you put that rifle up and you look through that scope or down your sights, at the end of the day, you're killing that animal. Now, I say killing, I know people say harvest, people say take, people say shoot, people say all sorts of things, and there's all sorts of ways you can use the word kill. But at the end of the day, you're taking that animal's life. And like I said, as a guy who grew up in a family where it was like going to the zoo was how I experienced animals, and I have a almost 2-year-old, and he loves his stuffed animals, and we anthropomorphize. That's what we do. We project our emotions onto wildlife. That's why I think that's why so many people love wildlife. And no disrespect to animal rights activists, that's why they love wildlife, because there is an emotional component there that's very strong. And so for me, yeah, it's something I would like to do. I just got to get to that point where and that's, I guess, where we go next.
Yeah, so the rest of the email to me was, here's my problem though, as you just described. How do I deal with hunter's remorse? I understand life and death in nature. I work in the biological science field. The difference though is that I'm the one that's going to be doing the killing, i.e. not Mother Nature. How do I find the balance between logic and the emotion? How do I express emotion without letting it overwhelm me post-hunt? You really want to do this, but worry that I may not be able to pull the trigger when the time comes. I love wildlife, but I know that it requires management. Your podcast has truly changed my perspective, but any advice to get over the hump would be greatly appreciated. And so instead of me responding to you with an answer, I said, let's podcast about it, because I think that would be a phenomenal podcast for others, because I think a lot of people wrestle with the same thing. So let me ask this. I want to step through the hunt that you have been on. You've been on one hunt, multiple hunts?
I've been on a few hunts, and I've only seen a whitetail shot once.
Okay.
I'd say I've been on
Tell me
three
about that experience. Tell me about that experience.
I was out with a coworker. I had expressed a desire to go with him. We met up. His mother owns a horse farm, but behind that, there's 100 acres of beautiful property. And he set up an additional stand for me. And we met up early in the morning when it was just still a little bit dark, just turning light. We headed back. It was very, very cold. I think this was the first day of rifle season here in New York. And we sat there for a while. And
are you sitting next to him? Are you sitting right next to him, or in a separate tree or something?
I'm in a tree next to his, so I would say 10 feet away from him. And we just sat there for a while, and you could hear ravens, and it was just beautiful morning. And then all of a sudden the deer started to kind of emerge. We watched one go by that he decided he didn't want.
What are you feeling at that point when you're starting to see the deer, knowing that you're in a hunting scenario versus not just like viewing them?
Totally mixed emotions. On the one hand, I'm like appreciating watching them. On the other hand, there's this level of anxiety that I'm feeling, that I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch a deer potentially lose its life. And at that point, there was a doe that came out, and then there was a buck that came out not long after, because this is during the rut. And I could see my coworker take aim, and at that point, I'm saying, there's part of me that's saying I want to see this, and then there's the other part of me that's saying I hope he misses. But he's ex-military, so I had this feeling that he's probably not going to miss. And then,
did he say that's the one I'm going for?
Yeah.
Or you just were watching him? I
was watching him, but he put up his hand kind of to signal that, that's the one. And then at that point, he drew up his rifle, and he, and I said, okay, this is probably going to happen. And it was one shot. Deer went down. I would say it was probably dead within 20 seconds. And then that's when it was like this just wave of different emotions just swept through my body.
What is your friend doing at this point after he's pulled the trigger?
He sat there for a while, just sat, just looked, held his hand up for me not to move, just to stay where I'm at in my stand. And we just kind of sat there for a couple of minutes. We didn't really do it.
What do you think he was doing? What do you think he was doing in that moment?
I don't know.
mentally?
Mentally, I don't know. I mean, maybe processing it himself. I mean, we never really talked about it. But he just sat there for a couple of minutes, and the doe had ran off. And after a while, we just, then he kind of gave me the all clear, and we went down, and we checked him out. It was a beautiful 8-point buck. And then that's when we went back up, got the truck, brought it down, and then he proceeded to field dress him there. I watched and assisted, and then we.
What did you think? What was going through your brain during the field dressing process?
That part I never had a problem with, because I think at that point,
Okay.
like, well, it's dead, it's done, life is gone, life has been extinguished. My wife's father has processed deer for hunters for years. He doesn't do as many as he used to because hunting has dropped significantly in upstate New York. So I've actually watched him process deer, and I've actually helped him process deer. So in a way, that part I was prepared for. That part, I was
okay.
So that it was the point between life and death. That was really I guess the apex of everything. It was like, okay.
Yeah, a lot of people have an issue with the animal up until you essentially skin it.
Okay.
And then once the skin is off and the guts are out, it's just like something changes in their brain. They're like, oh, now it's just meat.
Yeah.
Now it's just a cow or just a sheep or something like that. It's totally like there's something about it. It's like, oh, this isn't fluffy, and it's not furry, and it's not hasn't got an eye anymore, and it's just meat.
Correct. I would say I still felt sad throughout the day, after the fact. But at the same time, I was glad that I was there. And I had so many different thoughts. I mean, thoughts about how many deer starve to death, over harsh winters, how many deer get hit by cars, how many deer, I don't know, die for many other reasons. I mean, we don't have chronic wasting disease here in New York State, but I know that there's issues in other states. They do get other diseases here. My romantic view of nature will never go away, in the sense that I love nature. But there's this other side of it that people don't want to talk about, and that is that animals do suffer, animals die. And it's one of those things that you don't fully appreciate until you see it. And I'll actually mention, as a side note, when I was in the Serengeti, we did see some lions, two lionesses that were feeding on a buffalo while he was still alive, because the hyenas had actually taken it down first, and the lionesses were panic eating because the hyenas were getting their clan, and the troops were kind of reinforcing. So they were panic eating, because usually lions don't do that. Usually lions go for the jugular. They'll squash the oxygen out. And I mean, that was very traumatic for a lot of people that I was with that were there.
Was it traumatic for you? Was it like super sad for you, or you're like, whoa, this is fucking cool?
It was sad.
It's okay for you to say the latter.
It was sad, but at the same time, it was quite an experience to see that. And again, all it did was reinforce that idea that this is what nature is. That's not to say that animals don't have sentience. That's not to say that. It's just, but this is what it is. I mean, this is what's happening right now. And
were there any tourists on the vehicle that were like happy?
No. No.
Okay.
No,
okay.
Not at all. In fact, they They had gone. We all went back the next day for other folks for closure, just to see the uh, the body after it had died. But I would say I was more sad about the deer than I was about the buffalo. But again, that goes back to human involvement. You know, and
Mike, do you think that you can love deer? Let's just use deer as an example. Do you think you can love deer and kill deer?
Yes, I do.
At the same time.
I do. I absolutely do. I think that. I'll start from the scientific perspective. From the scientific perspective, we're always taught you don't look at individuals, you look at populations. If you care about individuals, any effort to make sure that a species survives is going to fail. At least that's my view.
Correct. Correct.
You can't save every animal. It's impossible. It's just you can't. So from that perspective, yes. But I don't. I think you can love deer, but I also think that you have to look at it from a different, I guess, from more of that bird's eye view. It's like, well, do we want deer around? Of course we do. Do we want too many deer? No, we don't. Do we want deer to go extinct? No, we don't. And whitetails historically actually had a lot of issues here in the United States before they enacted, hunting and things like that. I know that whitetail were almost extirpated, I believe, at one point.
100%.
Yeah. Yep. So I think,
300,000, I believe, at the turn of the century to now 32 million.
To now 32 million. Yeah. And so, yes, I think you can love deer and hunt deer. I think it's hard. I don't think for someone like me, I don't want to speak on behalf of other people. I think it can be difficult. But I think it's something that's doable. And I think that's something that you can appreciate that you're contributing, first of all. If you get your deer tag, you're contributing to conservation. So you are helping those animals at the population level to survive. But yeah, it all goes back to pulling the trigger.
Yeah. And I think, look, this may be the most controversial statement that I say. I think every single hunter has remorse when they kill an animal.
Okay.
Because in society today, if there was not a semblance of remorse, then there may be some sort of lack of empathy inside you. Humans have empathy. Humans are built to be empathetic creatures. That is part of our DNA. It's part of our character. And so we have empathy towards wildlife. And hunters and hunting have empathy towards wildlife. And here's where empathy and remorse comes out. Lots of different ways.
Okay.
There's empathy and remorse tied to what we've just talked about scientifically. I have to manage. We have to manage. We have to kill. There's remorse tied to that. But we know that there is an end game that is positive for the population of that species. Call it deer, call it elephants, call it plains game in South Africa, or feral deer in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
There is remorse tied to that. There's the ultimate type of remorse, which is sadness. Sadness for taking a life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Now, some people in the hunting space will say, you're not supposed to cry, you're not supposed to be emotional, whatnot. I know lots of people that are emotional. I know lots of people that cry. I know lots of people that cry after the trigger pull, and then they cry even more when they put hands on the animal. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not that you're, again, in today's polarizing society, people are going to be called snowflakes and liberals and all the nonsense jargon just because you show emotion. There's nothing wrong with showing emotion. It's part of who we are. It's part of our empathetic. I think empathetic is maybe not even a word. I'm just making it up. But part of our empathy as humans. And so I think that if you didn't have empathy for killing, then you'd probably work in an abattoir and do it for pleasure. And I know nobody in society that does that.
Right.
Okay? When somebody goes, no, I enjoy hunting and I enjoy killing, I'll say, I agree, I do too. But the joy doesn't come from ending the life.
Right.
The joy comes from the hunt and the experience and the places and the people and everything that we do around that thing. In that moment, the third part of remorse and remorse comes from the fact that it's actually an anticlimax
Right.
to this pursuit that is called hunting. Because we're not hiking, right? The point of us going into the woods is to go and kill an animal. That is the purpose, that is the intent.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going out to have a hike. We're going out to hunt. And in hunting, there's failure. In hunting, there's things that don't happen. But also, the goal of it is to kill that animal.
Right.
And so, in that pursuit, you may be under a management pursuit, i.e., you're going to cull, you're going to reduce population, or it's a specific animal that you've been chasing and chasing and chasing.
Right.
And I just did 2 podcasts about a guy killing a black bear in New Jersey and a guy killing a white-tailed deer in Louisiana. And it was a multi-year endeavor. And so the remorse there is, it's over.
Okay.
This chase is over. This thing that I've been doing is over. At the same time, in that moment, people sometimes are elated. Sometimes are hooping and hollering and yelling and saying, yes, 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 yes. And that is misconstrued for celebrating the fact that you killed the animal.
Right.
And it's difficult to say that it isn't, because it is, but it's also the celebration of hundreds of hours of work.
Yep.
It's like climbing to the top of Everest. It's taking you weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and months of preparation, everything. You get to the top and you cheer.
Right.
It's not, you're not cheering, you are cheering because you got there, but you're also cheering and celebrating yourself for how much it took for you to get to that point. And that is often misconstrued as you celebrating the act of killing.
Right.
And celebrating the act of death. Now, again, people's remorse varies, right? I believe everyone has remorse. I believe everyone acts in different ways. And I think you're going to have to figure it out yourself once you decide to do it. Is it that you pull the trigger and you feel nothing? Okay. Or is it in that like 1,000th of a second, 100th of a second, that part between you spanning the chasm between life and death, that everything slows down in your brain and in your mind, and this whole process just like sinks in deeper? Do you release a bunch of emotions after the the trigger pull, or when you go up to that animal? That's all part of it. And maybe through time that changes. Maybe that doesn't change at all. I know hunters that still been hunting for 15, 20 years. Every time they do it, they cry. Because they understand the depth. They understand the significance. They understand the responsibility of what they are doing.
Right.
And again, I don't think people take things lightly. Again, for the vast majority of hunters, they don't take killing an animal lightly. That's why you see people practicing all the time. Why does somebody practice with their gun, practice with their bow all the time? It's because they want to make sure that when they pull the trigger, when they release the arrow, that they're as lethal and as efficient as they possibly can be. And why are they doing that? Really, it's 2 reasons. Number one, the goal is to get that animal. But number 2, which is either a very direct thought process or is very much integrated into an indirect thought process because of you wanting to get that animal, is that you are as ethical and as humane as you possibly can be to end that animal's life as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. I have, and this is something I would very recommend you and the listeners go and watch. There is a film that is developed out of Alaska. It's called Kuiu Bears.
Okay.
Kuiu
Mm-hmm.
Bears. It's an hour and 20 minutes long. It doesn't feel like an hour and 20 minutes. And it's a friend of mine who filmed at Peak to Creek Films out of Colorado. But it's with a lady guide in Alaska called Mutz Decker.
Okay.
And Mutz hunts very uniquely for these black bears that I don't think I've seen anybody else hunt in. And that's why I was so curious at the guy's reaction when he killed that animal, because again, everyone has different reactions. But Mutz hunts black bears.
Okay.
And she hunts them on river systems. And they're super quiet the entire time. They're whispering, there's whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And in the moment of them killing the animal, the gun will go off. And there's nothing. There's silence. There's no hooping, there's no hollering. She's, giving him like a virtual high five in the air.
Right.
Very respectful, very quiet, very reverent. Then when they go up to the bear, when they see the bear's dead, nothing changes. They stay quiet, they stay reverent, they stay respectful. Now, there's a reason why she does it, because she doesn't want to blow all the bears out in the areas,
mm-hmm.
right, in the river systems that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like a religious experience when you watch it, because it's just like, I've never seen it. And a lot of people do it that way. So I think, I've said a lot here in terms of trying to answer your question, but I don't think you shouldn't be afraid of being remorseful.
Okay.
You shouldn't be afraid of being sad. I think it's part and parcel of it. And I think maybe you were thinking that maybe you had to disassociate yourself from that part of you to become a hunter. And you don't. It's sad.
Yeah.
Part of and each person's going to deal with that sadness in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I can say is, once you do it, you've got to just understand what it is and just be in the moment, absorb the moment,
mm-hmm.
be grateful for the animal. Some people pray over the animal. Some people are very grateful because that food is going to go straight into the freezer and feed their families for the next 6 months. All sorts of things.
I think you're right. I mean, I think you're 100% right. For me, I think I know that it will be an emotional experience. I have no doubt in my mind. And for me, I'm on the one hand, I'm okay with that. I just don't want it to overwhelm me, like too much,
Why? Why are you worried about it overwhelming you? It's okay.
I don't know. I guess well, I've always taken a measured approach to life. A balanced perspective. Being in the world of science, you kind of have to. So, and it's not that I repress emotion or anything like that. I guess I just, I want to be able to have the emotion, but to be able to allow it to be there without it becoming unhealthy, I guess is the way I would put it.
Okay. Okay.
Without it becoming, I mean, it's because I mean, it's like, and I'm using a weird comparison, but it's like I had a friend whose father passed away years ago, and his mother just could not get over her grief. She just couldn't, and it took her places she didn't want to go for many years. And she's better now, thankfully. But I guess that's what I mean by an unhealthy level of emotion. I don't, and I don't think I would grieve.
See, I don't think you're gonna do that, because you've already experienced one death of that animal. And I think if I had to put my money in what's going to happen to you, is you're gonna do the activity. And again, I would suggest doing it with a friend.
Yep.
That you trust, that you want to be with. I think you're going to feel a range of emotions. You're going to grieve. You're going to be sad.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to get to the point where it's like, okay, now I've got to start gutting this deer.
Yep.
And I've got to use the deer. And I think then your mind's going to change, just like it did on your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be like, okay, cool. Went through that experience. And then, several days later, you're going to look back and go, oh man, and I hope this is the case. Oh, I want to go do that again.
Yeah. And I'm going to, I won't say I'm going to hold you to that, but I would like to see it go that way. I really would. Just because, like I said, I just see the value in it. And to go back to that question you asked, yes, I think you can love wildlife and hunt wildlife. I just, that's what's always upset me about what the anti-hunting community does, is they just try to put every hunter in this one box. And after listening to all the different people you've interviewed, that what they say and what actually is are two very, very different things. I see hunters who absolutely love the animals that they pursue. And not just the animals they pursue, but the other animals that are out there that are part of the food web that create this whole habitat and ecosystem, and each creature has its niche, and it's I would even argue that hunters in many ways know more about wildlife than animal rights activists, and that's because
100%.
I work with people who hunt, and people that work either for USDA or Fish and Wildlife. A huge portion of them are fishermen and hunters, and they will tell you that they love the animals that they are studying. They wouldn't have gotten into this as a career if they didn't, and yet they'll go out and they'll hunt and they'll fish. So yeah, I think you can love wildlife and hunt it. I really do.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, I appreciate you. I appreciate you emailing. I appreciate you listening to the podcast. I appreciate that. I'm very appreciative that we've had an influence. So do me a favor, when you do hunt the first time, send me another email, send me some photos. Let me know how it all went, okay? I'm super keen to keep in touch and see what your journey looks like.
I will absolutely do that. Thank you so much.